Welcome to Danny Houlihan's Irish Experience podcast. Join Danny on a journey through the historical island of Ireland, its people and the wild Atlantic way, which is Ireland's last frontier. Experience the music and the culture that makes up the longest coastal driving route in the world. Now, please welcome your host, Danny Houlihan.
Welcome to the Wild Atlantic Way and Danny Houlihan's Irish Experience Show. From my studio, Ballyeagh the Shulana Kunde Kiri. Welcome everyone to my show once more. And if you're jogging, walking, cycling, or even meditating, please take care. This episode, which like many I have produced over the years, sets into motion once more research and development in my work. This podcast serves as a template that highlights the interreaction between the landlord and, in this case, in my local area, the local tenant fishermen, in times when the ranking social individuals were there to enhance and protect their tenants. This, in most cases in Ireland, did not happen. This episode highlights one man's greed over hundreds of people's lives in the area, who survived on fishing alone. And I have to say, if he progressed with this insane and insidious plan, would have had a devastating impact on the surrounding landscape of a rural area and the environmental implications to the biodiversity of the region. I will be visiting other areas, and the actions or lack of actions by the landed gentry, good and bad, will be covered. The background to this episode is dated to the 1880s in an area of North Kerry that had a history of salmon fishing, going way back to the dawn of time, indeed back to the hunter-gatherers of the area between 7000 to 4000 BC. The area of Ballyeagh and Houlihan was inhabited by native Irish people speaking Gaelic, their tongue, and surviving on the local rivers for food, which supplied them with a rich, bountiful harvest for centuries. These people were called the Oireachtaí Connors, with a history and culture that could be traced back through the mists of time. They were boat builders, coopers, weavers, and artisan food makers, who even had their own flour mills for the production of flour for the large population of native Irish people which inhabited the area which I speak about. These people had their own laws, the Brehon laws, and the old customs stretching back to the time of the Druids and the ancient cool days. The townlands where this story deals with is in the old civil parish of Houlihan and Ballyeagh in North Kerry, and along the river Cashen, or Cashen Kiri Lucra, to Rahuna. Cashen Kiri Lucra was the pathway to the ancient kingdom of Kir. After the subsequent Norman invasion and the suppression of the O'Connor Kerry clan and Carrigafoyle, these native people were now under a new order, which in the hundreds of years to follow would see the lands being cleared with the loss of its precious woodland and wildlife that fed these people. One could be so harsh to say, raped of anything which could be taken and removed. Even the roots of the old oak trees and bog and soil was taken and transported out of the country to England. Indeed, with the loss of its language, its soul. This had, and still has, repercussions for the environment of the area, with the lack of its natural woodland cover and the native ecosystems that had been there for centuries. the area had many so-called landed gentry, from the Fitzmaurice's Lords of Kerry to a Miller, Harring, Burghurst, Locke, George Hewson, amongst what has been described by the old parish priest of the area, hungry wolves. One description, not by Danny, but by the words of the old parish priest. These individuals, as hungry sharks, one commodity that caught their greedy eye, which they all wanted, was salmon. A fish, if caught, was served on the silver-plated dinner tables of the affluent of London and other areas. This area of the Cashen was abounding in a rich harvest of marine life, salmon. Setting the background for you all, the local tenant fishermen were not consulted but were forced from the river, where once they could feed themselves, and also we should remember that the area had thousands of people living there, all in harmony with their area and their natural area. Good land husbandry was carried out there. Any trees cut down were always replaced, so future generations could use and enjoy. This practice was now gone. The result was a shortage of food for the people, even though there were grain sheds locally full of food, and their once river they fished within eyeshot was now under the control of the landed gentry of London and Lixnaw. A large fishery and smokehouse was erected in Ballyeagh at that time by the landlords, where boxes of 50 pounds kits of fish were produced, smoked, and sent to London to be sold to a lucrative business for the landlord, but not for the starving local people. If caught cooking a salmon, or one in a person's possession, eviction was soon to follow. But the greedy landlords, to their agents and sour-faced stewards in the area, who showed no mercy to any individual, both young or old. The area of Ballyeagh and Houlihan I speak about is located in North Kerry, and at that stage was an isolated place for its inhabitants. It was their resources from the times of the O'Connor Kerry clan of Carrigafoyle that kept them alive for thousands of years. I should say, one great place for tyrannical landlordism to thrive without checks by their superiors from London. This manifested itself in the loss of thousands of people from the area during the Great Irish Holocaust, commonly known as the Famine of 1846 and Black 47. The numbers of who died and who immigrated from this area we will never know. The numbers are completely out, and we will never get to the bottom. That's the truth. This story was set in the year of 1880, and according to reports and history of the period that was handed down, there were still people in the area dying of hunger and the threat of eviction and assisted immigration. Now, I will just give a background to the build-up to this story. As I said, I will search out other areas to see if this has duplicated itself. It probably has. I was related this story many, many years ago, and again, the date is 1880, drives home what our people had to put up with in their daily lives, and a period of local unrest brought out by the greed of the local landlord or so-called landed gentry, some of which I should state were absentee, and that should be noted. Whether they owned the land or were renting the land, what these landlords and landed gentry attempted to do proved that greed was there from the word go with these people, whose objectives should have been to enhance the lives of their tenants, not to exterminate them out of existence and their native language. What was related to me many years ago, that there was some huge demonstration in the town of Ballybunion in around the 1880s about a fishery at the Cashen. So I decided to trawl through my old archives for a clue, and I found a small but important piece of information. And if you are following my series, this will link up and will link up in the future. In this area of Houlihan and Ballyeagh, the estate of the late Henry Benjamin Harrington of London had been sold on, and after severe litigation by the parish priest to safeguard the tenant rights of the area, which he did. The land was owned at that stage by George Houlihan of Ennismore JP, who after long years of waiting and watching, this lucrative estate was now in his ownership. The truth is that he did give some employment in the area, but he had the fishing rights up the river in Lixnaw, several miles away, and now he had the Ballyeagh section of the salmon fishery. Living along the river at that time, there were still families that had survived the Great Irish Holocaust, or Irish Famine as it was called, of 1846 and Black 47. They supplemented their lives with the salmon from the river. Old George, in his wisdom, came up with a plan to embank the river to harness the salmon in the area close to his estate. This embankment would have caused severe damage to the salmon river and the livelihoods of the local people in the area, not to mention the dangerous implications to the surrounding landscape, its environment, and its ecosystems. I have to say, to his credit, he was a good farmer, I have been told and related, and it has been documented in his own right, and an expert in agriculture. This action, however, bordered on being detrimental to the area and its people. After many of his good deeds, he was now going to fail, with the massive opposition by local people and country people, led by the famous parish priest Father Mortimer O'Connor, champion of the people and parish priest of Ballybunion, North Kerry. The atmosphere in Ballybunion towards the landlord was at boiling point. A meeting was arranged at the famous Castle Green, dated 1880. Father Mortimer O'Connor and his group arranged a meeting which was located on the mound of grass where the bandstand is located today. It should be noted a small part of that mound still is there to this day and should not be removed. It's part of our history. What I'm stating is there's a piece to the left and right from the centre of the mound. This is what I'm speaking about. There's only a small bit left. I should add, there is an attempt to remove part of this mound. But after this podcast, I will demonstrate that this piece of our heritage should be kept for future generations. Now everyone, here comes the heavy stuff. Dated the 10th of July 1880, on a Monday morning, the people of County Cork read in their newspaper, the Irish Examiner, quote, "Important demonstration at Ballybunion," unquote. This extensive report goes on to state, quote, one of the largest meetings held in North Kerry, within the memory of one of the oldest inhabitants, assembled today within the old Castle Green of Ballybunion to protest against the act of Mr. George Houlihan JP Ennismore Lixnaw, who seeks to enclose a portion of Ballyeagh Strand which is adjacent to his property, unquote. Now, everyone, I have to state, these are not my words. These are the words of the people who were there at that time. This sets the day into motion, and from the reports of the day, that the local community was preparing for an influx of people to the area in support of their cause from all around the countryside. From local sources, it has been related to me, the village of Ballybunion started to fill with people arriving at that very early hour to assemble on the particular point on the famous Castle Green, the mound. This attested to the support the area had for its cause and the opposition to the landlord and his proposed plans. Quote, Tralee, O'Dorney, Kilflynn, Lixnaw, Ballyduff, Causeway, Listowel, Duwa, Newtown Sands, and even districts in West Limerick sent contingents to Ballybunion, unquote. The event was enhanced, as seen in the newspapers of the day, by the presence of the new Castle West Brass Band and the Ballyduff Band, which provided entertainment for the crowd and the demonstration. It must have been a fabulous sight, with the airs and tunes of our ancient ancestors wafting over the famous Castle Green on that famous day. Now, everyone, these are not my figures. As I've stated before, these are the figures that appeared in the newspapers of the day. 12,000 protesters were there to hear the speakers orate from the famous mound or the rising on the Castle Green, Ballybunion, North Kerry. Present on the day, as seen in the newspapers of the day, the Reverend Mortimer O'Connor, patriotic pastor of Ballybunion, Reverend L. O'Regan, Duwa, Reverend J. Burke, PP, Newtown Sands, the Reverend M. Godley, CC, Ballybunion, the Reverend D. Bresnan, St. Michael Seminary, Listowel, Messrs. Thomas B. Stiles, J. E. Leonard, Michael J. O'Carroll, PLG, M. Welsh, and T. Wolfe. The actions of the landlord here clearly were for financial gain, not for the community, who lived along the river in large numbers at that time. The fact is that George owned the land and the fishing rights. Locals had been fishing that was part of the river for centuries. Times for them had changed, but not in the mind of the landlord. We have to accept that. Embanking the Ballyeagh Strand would have caused a major ecological disaster for the area, with the areas upriver from the mouth flooding during high tides, thus putting the local people under stress for fish and indeed homeless. The wildlife would have been wiped out during the building of this large embankment, especially nesting birds and local wildfowl. The band stopped. An air of quietness descended on the Castle Green. First to take the chair and address the thousands of people gathered amidst rapturous applause was Father Mortimer O'Connor, parish priest of Ballybunion and champion of his people. Letters of apologies were read and received from Colonel Colthurst MP, the O'Donoghue MP, and Mr. Parnell MP. Now, one of the names mentioned stands out, Parnell, leader of the Irish Party in the House. This will be of interest to all, including students and locals, that Father O'Connor was well known for his fight against tyrannical landlordism. Now, just a small transcript of the letter. This is from Charles Stewart Parnell himself. Quote, My dear Father O'Connor, I regret very much that it is not in my power to leave here for a single day during the session, as Irish business requires so much and such constant attention. Otherwise, it would give me great pleasure to attend your meeting, which I trust will be a great success. Unquote. Those are the words of Charles Stewart Parnell. Well, Father Mortimer was obviously held in high esteem. He goes on, The O'Donoghue has frequently pointed out in the House the conditions of the farmers of Kerry, and he would almost protect their chief chance of safety, lies in taking up that determined attitude towards territorial injustice, such as meetings as you have organised tend so largely to foster. This is just an excerpt, and he finishes off by truly yours, Charles Stewart Parnell, dated July 15th, 1880, unquote. History in the making. A large crowd around the famous Castle Green in Ballybunion, North Kerry. This was highlighted by Father O'Connor in his speech, which he states, quote, "Fellow countrymen, you are assembled on this occasion to protect your most sacred rights and vital interests. It is under consideration of the government to transfer your ancient strand or foreshore of Ballyeagh to George Houlihan for his arrangement. The right of the public to these foreshores was fully established in the law courts some years ago after a tedious and expensive course of litigation." Unquote. Breaking from this, I'm just going to put a small bit of background around this. Now, the sand at the Cashen is full of nutrients brought down from upriver. Soil and other natural minerals from the bogs, the rotting woodlands, were ideal and intermixed, so perfect fertiliser, coupled with seaweed, was ready-made fertiliser for the land. Back now to the speech. Father Mortimer next gives us a glance, just a small glance, at the population of the area in 1880. We are led to believe by the statistics that have been given to us over the years that there was only a small population left after the Great Irish Holocaust of 1846 and 1847, commonly known as the famine. And remember, these are the words of the Ballybunion parish priest, Father Mortimer O'Connor. Quote, "At this moment, hundreds of families are depending on their existence in the salmon fishery of the Cashen." Father Mortimer goes on to say, "Embank the Strand and the fishery is destroyed, and the surrounding countryside will be undulated." Now we get figures of the population of the area as seen through the eyes of the parish priest of Ballybunion. Quote, "Now, taking a look at these figures, there was still a substantial population in the area of Ballyeagh, Houlihan and Rahuna along the river, according to the parish priest." Father Mortimer O'Connor now speaks about evictions. Quote, "Why was McNamara of my Bella evicted? Because he refused to pay what appeared to him as an impossible rent." Unquote. Mortimer relates the implications of George Houlihan's plan to embank the river or enclose it. Quote, "If the Ballyeagh Strand is enclosed, no tenant on the Mybella and adjacent townlands can't pay for their rent because they will have no means of manuring their lands, and thus the case of McNamara will be multiplied 100-fold. I have placed these matters fully before the government, and I will hold it responsible before the world for the outrages that will be committed and the blood that will be shed if it carries out its insane and iniquitous project into execution." Unquote. That described George Houlihan's plan in the area as insane and iniquitous. One suggestion that was put to me, no, I have no proof, that there was an attempt to flood the area and its residents out of their homes, but failed. I don't think that was the plan. Trapping the salmon quicker is more likely the truth here. But you'd never know. After Father Mortimer, the proposals against the attempt to embank or enclose the strand of Ballyeagh were put to the people by Thomas P. Stiles. Now this is relevant to all ancestors from this area and students alike for study. Quote, "That the strand of Ballyeagh is the greatest source of manure to the surrounding agricultural districts, that landlords, in adjusting their rents, have always regarded to the facilities of obtaining sand and seaweed from this strand, that the most valuable salmon fishery, upon which hundreds of families depend on sustenance, depends along this strand, through which the Cashen flows into the Shannon. That therefore, to transfer this strand to Mr. George Hewson to be enclosed by him for his arrangement is an act of glaring confiscation and injustice and should be resisted by every legitimate means at any cost." Unquote. He goes on to say, "They were here today in defence of their indefeasible rights." Cheers erupted from the thousands around the famous Castle Green mound. A reaction from the mound echoed from the high cliffs over the golden strand of Ballybunion. Siles goes on, after the cheers subsided, quote, "He was a working farmer himself, and he could not work his land without the aid of manure. He would say to them that if the Ballyeagh Strand was closed up as Mr. Hewson—" I break for a moment. The mention of George Hewson's name, there was groans from the crowd. Hundreds would be deprived of manuring of their farms. Now I break here again. He next mentions the damage to the surrounding countryside, which would have damaged the lands, the lives of the people, the wildlife, and the ecosystems of the area, also evictions, and the name of a man now lost in time. Is this an ancestor of yours? You'd never know. He goes on, the lands around will be undulated, and it will be a second case of Matthias O'Flaherty of the Marsh, who was thrown out for not being able to pay his rent. Boos erupted from the Castle Green in Ballybunion towards Staunton, the landlord. A voice shouted from the Castle Green because he would not pay an exorbitant rent. "No," Siles shouted back, "because he could not make grass grow in 3 feet of water over it." Unquote. The proposal finishes with a thanks to others who helped us here. That is from the United States of America. My friends, many amongst us today were saved this year from actual starvation by the alms kindly given by a pitiful world. That's a fact. A shout from the crowd. Father Godley then gathers himself together and climbed the mound, in excitement only to slip on the mud, recovered himself, and with his crucifix addressed the large crowd, who gave him a rapturous applause. Father Godley was liked. Well, they did say he was a godly man. Quote, "The embankment of the Ballyeagh Strand will cause tidal waters, which is the natural outlet and basin, to flow upon the surrounding country, rendering tillage and vegetation of every kind possible. This means the ruin and destruction to the entire community, and that of an act of such enormous iniquity deserves the reprobation of every right-minded man." Father Godley goes on to thank the people. He congratulated the whole of North Kerry on such a magnificent gathering, and he was proud to see, now everyone, this should be noted, he was proud to see the ladies appear in their numbers. Cheers erupted from the mound on the Castle Green for the ladies being present. Times were changing, everyone, especially when the ladies were there. Father Godley goes on, "When the ladies and gentlemen were there, it was a sign of domestic solidarity and national prosperity." Unquote. It should be pointed out as well, to get a balance to this, that in the minds of the landed gentry at that time, their own chosen few would have received work from the result of the strand being embanked and its building. That's a fact. And in the light of the period was the practice. It was the ordinary occupiers with no rights to tenure of their land that would have suffered the most. In history, we cannot change it, but a twist to this is 8 years later from our history we are told that George Hewson travelled to London to an agricultural show. There he met a designer of one of the world's most famous unique railways, the Landlord monorail, and encouraged him to come to Ireland and Ballybunion. Indeed, a twist in the story. This monorail would enhance the area, and indeed his lodges, and the building of more houses. Also the removal of hundreds of thousands of tons of sand from the golf course, cattle, seaweed, butter, lime for building, and manure, and other agricultural products that were being put together in the area. To hear this story on the monorail, just check out my podcast series on the Landlord Railway. Thankfully, the demonstration had its effect on the plans of the landlord to embank the strand of Ballyeagh and the Cashen. But at this point, the landscape and political structure and climate of the country were changing. In the future, he would be responsible for many initiatives, some good. The writing was on the wall, though, for the landlord and the landed gentry and their middlemen, and indeed their dour-faced stewards in the area of Ballyeagh and Ballybunion. The tide at the mouth of the river was going out, and going out fast, for the landed gentry. Today, hundreds of families are gone now, and the shouts of laughter in our Irish language from the banks of the Cashen, and indeed the salmon fishery is gone forever, which filled the pockets of the affluent people who were based in London. In its past, the river was life to many in the area, with food, which was a bounty to them. They too are gone now forever, and the trades and our precious Irish language is lost to time. However, what's left along the river, and indeed the few salmon that are there, is our future of our natural areas, where the wild birds and the remaining ecosystems survive along the banks of the Cashen River. Before I take my leave of you all once more, I would like to give a good shout out now to a couple of my supporters and members of my podcast series. Yes, I have membership open. I would like to give a good shout out now to Karen Linton, who is listening to all of my shows and loves the music as well. Thanks, Karen. There is more to come, and again, thanks for supporting the show. I'm delighted you are out there and enjoying the podcast series and my Irish experience, which is only going to get better and better. This year, a friend has contacted me from Texas. Bruce Moriarty, a man who loves his people and his old Irish country, from the area of Tullabeg and the King family. Bruce is in the United States of America, as I stated. Thanks, Bruce. We will catch up during the summer when you're at home and have an old Irish chat about our people. If you would like to support my research, which is ongoing, everyone, and podcast series, why not become a member of Danny Houlihan's Irish Experience? Yes, you can become a member. And as I said before, buy me a coffee. This will be used to update my research and equipment and further my extensive research. I will give everyone who contributes a shout out in my series. Just click on the link below to support me in any way, big or small. Thank you. So if you would like to join my membership, click on the link, buymeacoffee.com/YXQDanny. That is buymeacoffee.com/YXQDanny. But for now, from the banks of the Shannon River in Ireland, County Kerry, I say slán, bye for now.
Thanks for listening to our show. Through its people, its heritage and its rugged coastline, this is truly Danny Houlihan's Irish Experience. Bye for now.